an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Fullmetal Alchemist, Brotherhood, episode 56. 56. We are so close, y'all. Return of the Fuhrer. In this episode, the Fuhrer decides that he is going to show up and just absolutely wreck every person in his path. And he decides this, and then he just does it. He just goes ahead and does it. And I am much more intimidated by him this episode than I have been by him this whole time. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Max for commissioning this episode. I'm recording this one on Saturday morning because I missed it last week because of computer issues. So thank you, Max, for being flexible. And there are still some people here, despite it being a weird day. And y'all, I watched this last night and I was just like, it's one of those things where Owen was sitting with me. And do you guys ever have this where you're watching something with a person who isn't always there and you start to get almost like a little self-conscious about what you're watching because they maybe don't... And it's like, Owen has watched Fullmetal Alchemist before. It's not like it is a foreign show to him. He watched almost half. But I still have this moment of kind of like, is it going to be lame for him to sit down and watch this when he hasn't watched the other episodes previous? And we're having this big dramatic return, and he didn't really get the full impact of this guy, like disappearing, yada, yada, yada. Let me just say, it did not matter. We were watching this, and Owen was just like, oh my God, a couple of times. And at one point, he's just like, how come his sword can just cut through everything? And I was just like, magically sharp sword, babe. It just is. I don't know. He could just do that. And by the end, he was like, yeah, that was a really good episode. And I felt very much the same. So the last episode ended with the Fuhrer turning up and being like, bitches, I know that you all are out in the streets dancing and opening champagne and shit, but I am here to let you know that you should put that shit away and get your shields up and pull your weapons. Because it is not over. It is not even close to over. This episode begins with Hempstool. Hohenheim is in the desert talking to himself. So we're finally getting some of this like information that I was so curious about because we saw him send off a couple of like blobs from his own body, and he calls them by name. And I was like, are these people that he knew? What we find out later is that some of them are people that he knew, but it doesn't matter if he knew them or not. If they are in his body over these like 1,000 years, he has learned the name of every single person whose soul is now inside of him. And first of all, that sounds so overwhelming until you think about like the sheer amount of time he has had to do it. Secondly, the fact that he is able to, and he's in this desert talking to himself, and clearly they can hear him and are responding, and he can hear their response. I am just dying to know exactly how this works. I'm assuming it's something similar to what we see with the way things are between Greed and Ling, where it just sort of looks like Ling is chilling in the midst of the bloodstream and occasionally talking to him, and the person who's like occupying the body itself at the moment has the big face looking down at the little figure. That's sort of how I picture it in my head. And I don't know if we're ever going to get like an inside look at what it is like in his head, in his body at large, I guess. But finding out this information was really exciting for me, because I was sort of like, you guys know, I have had very little patience for him. And I stand by pretty much everything I've said, to be honest. I'm not taking any of that back. But his frustration and deciding to leave his wife and kids makes a lot more sense when you think about him having constant conversations with everybody who is inside of him and being sort of haunted by the full population of a city. It's like the overwhelm that he feels and this desperation of like, I've got to figure out a way to stop this. I wish that we got a little bit more of that kind of feeling from him, the overwhelm. And granted, it may not be overwhelm anymore, because by the time he meets his wife and he has kids, this has been going on for quite a while. And maybe he's just sort of learned to cope with it by this point. But even so, like what I always think about in these sorts of situations is you become part of a group that's watching all the time, is the impression I'm getting. And I may be wrong about that, but that's sort of the vibe. When you're having sex with your wife, are they just there with you? I know that he doesn't exactly have to eat and drink, does he? Or no, he does, because he like collapses from dehydration here. So despite being immortal, he still has to care for his body like a human, I guess. Are they just like with him in the bathroom? Is it just, that's the kind of thing that I always think about with this shit. No privacy ever in your life again. I'm sure it's the kind of thing that you eventually just get used to. But I can't imagine getting used to something like that. And it would be bad enough with one other being. But this is a crowd. This is a city. That's insane. So anyway, we will get back to that. But the episode begins with him struggling through the desert, collapsing. And like I said, apparently he does need to care for his body in a way that humans do. I don't know if he's like gotten past that somehow and evolved by the point that we're at now in the story, but here it does not seem to be the case. Maybe he would have just laid there forever, dehydrated and half alive, and he would never have actually died, but it certainly seems to have an effect on his well-being. And these Xing traders come across him in the desert, and they think for sure he's dead. And they decide to pause and bury him out of respect. And one of them begins to move him, and they realize he's still alive, and they give him some water. Can I just tell you guys how, like, touched I was for some reason by the voice acting of one of these, like, Xing traders when he says, drink it really slow, only a sip at a time. There's something so, like, attentive and mommy about it, and it was very cute. I was just like, oh, these guys. So then they get back on the road, and he's on the back of a camel. And they're asking him, what were you doing here in the desert? And he says, I have no place to go, no place to return. I had to get as far as Xerxes as I could. Too scared. And when he says that, it's like not him speaking. The too scared sounds like somebody else. Here's my question. The Xing traders look at each other in a way that indicates to me that they seemed to hear something. Are they supposed to be able to hear the souls in him speak? And because, like, he then says out loud, I know you are, I'm sorry. I mean, what this sounds like to me is now we see him speaking out loud and saying, oh, go and do your thing. And like these two little lumps come off him and travel. Is he only able to speak to them out loud? He can't do it just in his head? Does he have to like speak out? I mean, I want to know a lot more about how this works. B. Morris here says, not certain, but my interpretation was he could sustain himself, but that would consume the energy of the souls, which he sees as people, so he has an aversion to doing that when he can. Oh, interesting. Okay. That never occurred to me that, like, you're immortal because you just have the energy of lives to use up instead of yours. But that makes sense. Okay. That is really interesting. And sort of makes the fact that he's immortal. I mean, he still is. Obviously, it's been forever and he's the same age. So somehow he's still managing to, like, stay alive without aging for hundreds of years. I don't know if he is forced to use up souls in that time, or maybe some souls volunteer, because it feels very much like they're all on the same team by this point. And maybe some of them are like, I'll allow you to use me up if you promise to, like, keep trying to seek out how to put all of this right, which would really make a lot of sense. But maybe it's supposed to be like, as long as he takes care of himself, he's a self-perpetuating machine. And if he doesn't, and he's on the verge of death, like from this sort of, you know, like dehydration here, then he has to use one up. Again, I really would like for this to be a little bit more fleshed out and explained, and we may be getting that. I don't know. But just because I'm sitting here with like a lot of questions immediately, I'm going to theorize on them, and forgive me guys if it does get answered and I'm just seem to be wasting time. Let's see. B. Moore says, I think it's in his head. I think they just hear a dehydrated guy talking to himself. And Zidiegi says, I don't think other people are supposed to hear the souls. That's interesting. Okay, because the way he says, like, I'm too scared, that seemed to be what they were responding to and looking at one another. But maybe they were just responding because he hadn't been talking to himself yet in that scene. So when they look at each other without certainty in a sort of, what's up with this guy? He hadn't been talking to himself. It didn't seem like it. It's there. He's just answering their question about how he doesn't have anywhere to go. And, you know, so that was part of why I felt like, are they hearing like another voice and kind of like, where is that coming from? What is going on? But I don't know. Maybe it's supposed to be that he was talking to himself before this moment. I don't think so. If you just watch the scene and see the timing of it, I think you'll understand my confusion. But anyway, he says, I know, I'm sorry. I couldn't stop him. I'm sorry. And this is when he starts using names. This one, he says, I'm so sorry, surgeons. And we hear that name again later. And we cut away from that flashback back to the present. And he is down in the fucking catacombs, as I keep thinking of them, with Father. And he's talking about each of the individual people that are inside of him that he remembers. And there's this guy, Surgeons, and his son, whose name is Zor. And we're seeing in sort of sepia tone his memories of these people. The florist, Kaya. I've rarely met such a compassionate woman. Sorry, the stable hand could never get his fill of liquor. Trust me, I've had to drink for him. Tommy's boyhood dream was to become a respected scholar. Giderush worked as a cook. He was fired one time for feeding a starving vagrant without charging him. And my fellow slave, Andal, he bitterly considered me a rival because I was favored by our master. Sul was somewhat of a remorseless reprobate. He was awaiting execution. He was probably the most determined to get the last shot at you. And as he's saying all of this, Father is standing there with his hand out and his, veins bulging. Because, reminder, he had started to reach into Hempstool. And some, red something starts going up his arm. And he pulls back very quickly and is like, what the fuck is going on here? That shit is still moving around under the skin. And Hempstool says every single one of those tortured souls has now invaded your being. I think he means just the ones that he has specifically named here. And there are still, hundreds inside of himself. Maybe thousands. I don't remember how many he says, but he will say it in a moment. So essentially, the souls are going to sabotage Father's body from the inside. He calls him contaminated, and they're working to see your destruction. And this dude is like, every single soul has its own consciousness and will. I am not buying it. They were reduced to energy. That's all they became. That's the whole point of that, sacrifice. And Hohenheim says, yeah, I think that it makes sense. You don't see how this could be done. I was convinced I'd be driven mad trying to individually sort out the ocean of screaming voices within me. But I had plenty of time to converse with each and every one of them. That was one of the few benefits of this undying body you gave to me. I had the time to listen to what they had to say, unlike you. And I learned the name of every last soul, 536,329. Okay, so way more than I've been saying. 536,000. I don't think I realized how big that city was. 329. The people you trapped inside of me. And this is when we see inside of Father's bloodstream, and we see them beginning to move and shoot around. And all of a sudden, a spike of force comes out through his forehead like a fucking unicorn horn. And this is one of the souls. I am going to assume this is the guy that was on death row that he said was the most eager, because that just makes sense to me that he would be very aggro about this. And Hohenheim is saying, your flask is broken. We will destroy you. Return to the nothing that you came from. The container of yours is the first to go. And then a bunch of other spikes begin to slice through him until he is being held up off the ground by the spikes that are coming out of his own body. All we have to do is tear through that leather bag you designed to look like me, which is a really great line, and you'll be reduced to dust. However, that is not actually what happens. All of a sudden, the spikes retract. They are clearly now being controlled by Father. And all of a sudden, the one that was coming out of his mouth that looked like it would kill him begins to take shape and actually consciously step out of his body. And it leaves his body on the ground like a deflated balloon. You guys, this was so creepy. It is so creepy. There's something about what this makes me think of is like the reverse of any movie where you're being, the main character's being stalked by somebody in a mask, or they're fighting people who wear masks. And those people seem so much more intimidating because they have this sort of facelessness, and you don't see any expression on their face of like struggle or reaction because of the mask. It makes them seem stronger and much more intimidating than they actually are. But then they lift the mask and all of a sudden you're like, oh, right, that's just a person. And they're sweating and whatever, like this is like the opposite, where Father seemed less intimidating because he's just copying Hempstool, which for me, the fact that he's still trying to maintain that appearance was like, on the one hand, understandable, but also I felt like the fact that he hadn't decided on something of his own to make himself look distinct was a lack of imagination that made me feel a little bit less afraid of him. Does that make sense? Like, he couldn't even design a body that was just him. He had to copy somebody else because he just was sort of not having any good ideas and was like, I guess I'll just take that body. The fact that this thing climbs out of him and leaves him on the ground. And this thing, it doesn't have no expression. It has them, but it's still kind of faceless. This is much, much scarier. I hate this so much. And not only does it climb out, it eats the body. It's just consuming it. Like, I don't even know what to compare it to. It is really creepy to see the body like move along the floor as he's gobbling it up like an ear of corn or something. Y'all, I'm watching this last night and I feel like I went, oh snap, like 6 times in a row. This whole scene was so full of weird surprises and imagery that made me deeply uncomfortable, and concepts that made me deeply uncomfortable. Like the idea that Hempstool's running around with 500,000 souls inside of him. Even I had the number wrong. And even the number that I had was like, well, that sounds like the worst thing I could imagine. And now I'm seeing like exactly how many, and I'm like, oh, so much worse. Oh my God. So he eats his own body. And Hempstool is completely floored. He really thought, if we destroy your container, that's it. But what I found sort of weird was that he saw how Pride extended all the way down into tunnels and called the spot where Pride had to stop the end of Pride's container. So he sort of should know that this body isn't it. Like, it's very clear Father has figured out some new ways to do things. And Hempstool doesn't seem... It's almost like he thinks, if I just destroyed the first guy, the original, and I destroy his body, everything that he has made around himself since he was created will crumble because I have gotten rid of the origin of it. Which I guess I can understand thinking that that's how it would work. But personally, just from a story perspective, I'm super glad that's not it, because it's so understandable. I really do get it. But there is something very lazy at times about the just kill the queen or the mother or, you know, whatever it is that's sort of controlling the hive that's a really, really common thread in a lot of stories where you've got like a ton of monsters and only one main character who you can't believably have slay like 60,000 monsters. So you have to give them one to focus on and take down. And that's going to be the one that they... And that's not even quite the thing here. There's, you know, we have like the deadly sins, and some of them are already dead, as we know. Most of them, actually. I think now Pride and Wrath are the only ones left, other than Greed, who has defected. So I don't really count him, but maybe I should. But if that had been the case, and it was just take down Father and everything else begins to crumble, I feel like I'd have been a little bit disappointed by it. And that is not to say that you can't still have defeating him be the main thing. But the simplicity of what Hempstool was imagining, I feel like I'm grateful it wasn't what he thought. I just think that he really should have been a little bit more prepared for the fact that shit was different than he was expecting. Because this guy has like separated deadly sins out from himself and made homunculi out of them and has an edge to a container so that he can send Pride like miles away. Clearly, he has been working on some prototypes for shit, my guy. And this is sort of what he says. Because, sorry, I'm looking at the, Damien, lovely bit of horror in your shonen action series. Topher says, the entire country is his container all the way out to the tunnel. Sorry, guys, I keep having this frog in my throat. Right. So if the country is his container, and it seemed like Hempstool should know that, I don't think he should be surprised by this development. Because what it turns out is basically, as Father says, I told you I intended on becoming the perfect being. You have evolved and learned their names and figured out how to like treat them like individuals. I have also been working on some shit. And all of a sudden, this like being of darkness stands up and all these eyes open on his body, like all over it. And then in the ceiling, a bunch of eyes open and look down at Hohenheim. And it's like he is completely encircled. He has walked into the den of the enemy in as literal a way as you can even imagine. I don't believe we get another shot of him down there. So we'll have to wait and see. I am really glad that so far he's doing this by himself. But I have a feeling that we're probably going to like get our guys, Ed and Al, down there with him eventually. Because they know this room is here. You know, they were brought into it and then carried up into Central. So they are fully aware, and I am just going to guess that things are coming to a head down there, and everybody who has been anybody in the story is going to wind up in that room. However, I may be really, really wrong about that. And if I am, I won't be mad about it. I'm just sort of predicting the tropiest thing, which is like we have our crew of whoever's left standing deciding to stand together in one big dramatic final confrontation. And it may not turn out like that at all. So this is when we jump back up to the surface. Wrath is standing there, and he's coming towards the front doors of the palace. And one of the guys is like, is he just going to come up the front steps? And Wrath thinks to himself, do they really expect me to make a complete mockery of myself by entering through the back door of my own palace? And as he says that, he just sort of gestures to the side with his sword. And I'll tell you what, kids, this was the moment where I was just like, okay. He hadn't even started yet. But there is something about how he holds the weapon and just is like clearly making a mental adjustment, preparing to sail on in there and cause some wreckage, that I was like, okay, yeah, this guy very much knows what he's fucking doing. And while I was watching this, I kept thinking of the Blackthorn in Stormlight Archive. Anybody who has read that, this feels like who I'm going to picture from now on, even though he's like not as much of a monster. There's still something like a little bit monstrous about him, let's be honest. And the whole, like, I'm older, more experienced, and yes, I may have not got the endless vigor of youth, but I am more deadly because I have become efficient with the energy that I have. It just felt like that to me. So he begins running forward, and they open fire, and this motherfucker just does that Jedi thing of bouncing all of the bullets away from himself using the flat of the blade. And they even send a rocket toward him, and he slices it in half. And the two halves like go in different directions and fuck some other people up. And as this is like these two halves going in different directions, that really got to me. Buccaneer is watching all of this, and he seems to be understanding what he's facing. There's just a sense here of him going, oh my God, I can tell also just by his stance that this guy is nothing to fuck with. The rocket that is shot at him gets shot by the tank, which he starts coming for. And it's not entirely clear. I think the tank just hits reverse, right? Because there was a moment at first where it almost looked like he shoves the tank. And I was like, I don't think that's his power. I think that the tank just goes in reverse to get away from him. If he shoved the tank, frankly, I would be less impressed than the guys in the tank being afraid enough of him to go in reverse. You are standing there, no armor, no shields of any kind, blade in hand, sprinting towards an armored tank, and the guys in the tank back away from you. I mean, that is... that's all there is to that. I mean, that is hilarious and also just like, oh no. So when they back away, it goes down the stairs. Like they don't look behind them. This whole thing is so bonkers. I loved this so much, you guys. So have you some of you may know this account on Instagram. I've talked about it before or something else. I know. I talked about it on Unsober last week when we were talking about toys. There's an Instagram account called Kids Getting Turned. One of my favorite accounts, which is just videos of children absolutely losing their shit over, like, with excitement or frustration or a new toy that they get really overexcited about, or just doing things without really thinking about it. And one of the videos I saw recently, a kid was in one of those Hot Wheels cars, you know, the like tiny cars that kids can drive around. And this kid is, there were several kids in the shot. It's like a ring camera looking out over the backyard. And they have this in-ground pool, and then they have this sort of play area. And a couple of the kids are off to the side in the play area. And there's one kid in the Hot Wheels car and no adult in the frame. And this kid gets into it and just backs up quite slowly, quite deliberately into the in-ground pool and just goes down like a fucking stone with the Hot Wheels car. And then two men sprint into view and jump in the pool and save him. This felt like that to me. The tank backing down into the stairwell, not really intending to. It seems like it winds up working in their favor, that there's a place to drop where they think, get away from him. That winds up like working out for a time, very short time. But it certainly was not, I don't think, completely intended. And yeah, they go backward down through the stairwell as the Fuhrer tears through every single man standing in that little like antechamber before you get to the stairs. There are like 30 men sliced to ribbons, dropped in seconds as he just passes them. He doesn't even seem to really have to focus. It doesn't even feel like he's expending much energy worrying or taking care of these guys. They're just in his way. It's like he just opened a gate, and the opening of the gate sliced them all in half. So be it. There is something so insulting about that. Like, can you imagine? You decide you're going to make your big, brave last stand against the Fuhrer, and you're shaking in your boots. And just as you come to the conclusion you're going to do this, you're dead. It's like you're not even an afterthought. You're no thought. None at all. I would be so pissed, you guys. I would be so salty about that. That would just... forever. I would be so mad about that, like forever. So yeah, he just runs right past them. There's a couple of dudes who are like on the outskirts of the room that he ignores, and they keep trying to fire after him, but it does nothing. And the tank is continuing to try and fire at him, and it's even another rocket, which damages the palace from the inside. And this dude is just saying, "Did we hit him?" as Bradley comes through the fucking smoke and shoves his sword right through one of the like viewing holes in the tank and gets the dude sitting next to the guy who asked, "Did we hit him?" And you guys, this was it's such a really fine line to walk, where you want your character to be obscenely terrifying, but you also need it to feel just real enough that it's not completely over the top. It's not like, oh, I don't buy this. And we have seen enough of the physics in this world to know that like some things don't really matter the way they do in the real world. You know, the speed at which people can run and jump, it's all over the place. So that's no problem. And because they have established that, what he's doing here does not feel out of line to me at all. It's like, it's unheard of, and everybody being absolutely shocked and terrified makes sense. But it doesn't feel like, wait, he can just do this? It's more like he could just do this and we never actually saw him completely unleashed before. You know, like, it feels very believable to me that he had this under wraps and only pulled it out now and then. We have seen him fight, but fighting one person and taking them out no problem is not the same as what's going on here. And I mean, we even find out later about the way that he like saves himself from the train wreck, and the way he can almost like slow down time and look at the debris falling around him and use some of it as stepping stones to get to a safe spot. It shouldn't work. I should have an issue with this. And I just don't. It's fine. So anyway, he slices this fucking tank with his sword, which, by the way, that sword also manages to slice up Buccaneer's, like, his automail arm. And I really kind of expected his arm to withstand the sword. Even though this tank got taken out, I'm still here thinking, like, the tank is made out of the kind of metal that can be affected. But we know that the automail from up north that you have to use that's special and made of a different kind of alloy, that's different and sometimes stronger. And I really thought, you guys, that, like, Buccaneer wasn't going to be harmed. But he may be dead. I don't think he's dead. It seems not. But in any case, his arm is certainly out of play. That shit gets shredded. But we're not there yet. So he takes this, like, the wheel feels like too strong a word. The tank's conveyor belt wheel. He undoes that. One of the guys, very unwisely, starts to stick his head out through the top of the tank. And Bradley slices that guy and then drops a grenade into the tank. And everybody sees the explosion and all of the smoke pouring out. And then the front doors of the building open. And he just walks out, surrounded by smoke, into the courtyard. And truly, has there ever been a more badass entrance? I mean, I would just be gone. I'll tell you what. I would not be one of these soldiers standing here with their rifle raised, prepared to fight against him. I would be gone. Bye. No. I did not sign up for this. What I think is funny to me is that I don't believe still that any of these dudes know he's a homunculus. So I think they're finally starting to get the picture. And maybe they don't know he's a homunculus, but they're realizing, like, they're dealing with some shit very different than what they thought. But the fact that they thought he was just a dude up until this point, and now they're seeing this, has got to be quite a shock. Let's see, B. Moore says, terrible joke warning. Wouldn't be the first time tanks switched into reverse in response to a Fuhrer. Oh my God. Ooh. Yikes. Zajagi says, it's like Lyndon being bitch slapped into half. You guys, if you haven't read Cradle, a character gets slapped so hard that he is broken in half and dies. It's not funny, but it's like a little funny. Oh, Zajagi, that shit cracked me up so bad. Topher says, I think the idea is that he's able to push his body to its absolute physical limits because pain is irrelevant and he heals anyways. The eye is his weapon. It gives him information on everything around him. And he hasn't even, like, unleashed that yet. This all is going on with the fucking eye patch still on. And it isn't until he winds up dealing with everybody in this courtyard that he's finally like, all right, here we go. So he steps out. And Buccaneer comes at him. And he just, like, whirls out of the way, slashes Buccaneer. And there's quite a bit of blood. Buccaneer is brought to a knee. And I'm thinking, is he going to die behind him, kind of off screen? And even though Buccaneer has become a little bit more important, I wouldn't have been too upset if that was how he died. Because he died in service of just showing how hard it is to stand up to this guy. But no. The Fuhrer begins walking away. Buccaneer comes at him, automail arm extended. And the Fuhrer turns around and slices that shit right up. Completely destroys it. And then Bradley walks up to this dude whose name I will never remember, you guys. The one who's got, like, that gray shock of hair, who's guarding the main doors. And the Fuhrer says, what's the issue here? Your country's leader has returned. Open the gate. Lieutenant Fullmetal. That's right. And this dude, Fullmetal, starts crying. and says, "Forgive me, Lieutenant Mustang. It looks like I'm dying here." The camera, so to speak, drops down on the ground below his feet to show the tears fall and hit the ground. But I swear to God, you guys, I for a moment thought what we were seeing was him pissing his pants. I am not even kidding. For a minute, I was like, oh my God, he's pissing himself. And then I realized that this was like his tears, and I was like, okay, that's like slightly more dignified, but only barely. And as he raises the gun, Buccaneer says, "You can't die a heroic death crying like a coward. Don't even think for a second you're gonna die a more manly death than I am. I've got plenty of fight left in me." And he puts his fist into the ground that he has wrapped in the chain from the like chainsaw part of his arm as, I guess, a kind of like brass knuckle situation. And this is when the Fuhrer is just like, "You idiot. Really? Why are human beings so fucking stubborn? You're always like this." And then all of a sudden you hear, "You got that right." They get so frantic in the heat of the moment. It looks like it's going to do them any good. But pathetic as it may be, and they sure are, I still prefer to side with the underdog. And I cannot tell you how delighted I was to see Greed here. Truly. For a moment, I thought this was Havoc talking, because Havoc, we know, is not on location. He's in a wheelchair still. And I was thinking maybe he was like on radio, or because there has been some sort of like underground connection with him, you know? So I thought maybe this was going to be, "Oh, we wanted you to break through to the courtyard, and now we actually have you where we want you," kind of that, you know what I'm saying? And instead it being Greed, I was like, oh, this is way more fun. And Greed engages in this fight with him and doesn't really do as great as I think he wanted to do. But we'll get to that in a second. First, we go over to the radio station, and they are telling Mrs. Bradley that her husband has been found. He is apparently uninjured, and he is engaging in combat with the Briggs soldiers at Central Command. So all of Mustang's people, who are still in the studio overseeing the whole interview, are like, "Guys, we're going to have to blame the Briggs soldiers for this. Like, in the eyes of the people, we have to remain heroic and keep them on our side. And that means that we have to play like we're still on the Fuhrer side and maintain plausible deniability for him." I am going to assume that Wrath knows perfectly well what's really happening, but I don't think that that's the point. I don't think they're trying to deceive Bradley. I think it's just for like the public image, you know? But yeah, the moment where she starts crying and like in relief at the fact that he's still alive, I thought for a moment, the way that she started crying, that maybe she was like, had been told the truth about him and she was sorry that he had come back after all. But it becomes pretty clear she really doesn't know anything. They haven't explained almost any of this to her in truth. And she's still operating under this like delusion of who he is. So yeah, the fact that he's still alive comes as quite it's just a wrench in the works. And it's Fury, I think, who's talking to Ross, and he says something like, "Do you really think that he would attack the station with his wife here?" And she says, "I don't think that he has any real affection for her. I don't think it's a factor. But we know that he actually likes her, and Pride actually likes her. Now, there's two possibilities here. Either it turns out having his wife in their clutches is going to turn out to be more effective than anybody had predicted, or the writing is setting us up to think that it's going to be effective, and then it's super not going to be. And I'll tell you what, I wouldn't be too mad about it if it was that second one, and we had been sort of like tricked into thinking this is going to really work, and then it didn't do anything. I kind of enjoy being toyed with like that a little bit, as long as it feels like real. So I wouldn't be angry. But if it does turn out that it's something, that's also completely fine. I just wanted to put it out there. So, yeah, this moment of all of them realizing that they're going to have to sort of temporarily at least turn their back on the mission and just save face. They are not happy about this. So this is when we go back to the fight between greed and wrath. Third fight, actually, I guess, in the show between these two specifically. This is when we get to see how he was able to like find a way through the wreckage that was like falling off of the bridge and find a way through. Truly, it is delightful. This whole bit of him like running up the train track that is like falling and then catching a branch and hanging there. It's great. And I don't know if maybe his eye is supposed to be able to see through the patch, because he doesn't have his eye exposed during any of that. So if it's supposed to be that his eye enables him to like see things in a more detailed way, I don't know how he's doing it in that scene without it being uncovered. Maybe the patch is just meant to not really actually be a hindrance to him at all, which would be fine. And I love when he says something about how he's getting old and he's got more aches and pains than he used to. Greed is looking around at the sheer destruction he has caused and is like, he's complaining about not being as like on top of shit as he once was, and he can still do this. So we get a pretty fun moment where Fullman says something to him. Ling replies, and then almost mid-sentence turns into greed. And it's like this very distinct jump. And greed is like, I'm going to fight this self-righteous bastard. And again, greed is not quite ready. He is dodging adequately, but he isn't actually making any headway. The whole way that this fight is going is, it feels like he's what's the word I want? He's on the defensive the whole time, and he keeps trying to hide in Bradley's blind spot. And he says something about how Ling gave him some pointers, and this is when Bradley says, well, unfortunately for you, and he pulls the patch off. And so apparently, I guess now he doesn't have a blind spot. I guess that's just how that eyeball works, which that's fine. I don't mind. And yeah, he is cornered a couple of times. Like, shit gets quite real for him. And I had a genuine, like, is Greed just gonna die? I truly was a bit worried that maybe this was gonna be it. I didn't think so, really. But in the midst of this fight, the Briggs soldiers begin firing at Bradley. And we get another moment of Bradley just... He gets to one knee, he swings his sword, and the way that the animation is done, there's like light lines in a few different directions on the screen. Bradley is stock still. The men with the rifles are behind him, also stock still. And the lines are very faint. So for a minute I was like, wait, what's this? And then I realized the lines are meant to be like his sword strokes. And these dudes just explode in blood because the cuts are so sharp that they don't actually fall apart for a minute. And in the midst of this comes Buccaneer, who is very angry at the fact that he has taken these men down. And Bradley responds to that by just piercing him right through the guts and clearly thinks he's done. And Buccaneer is not done. And he slams a hand down trying to get Bradley. And Bradley is like, wow, your abs are pretty good. I have to admit. And this is Buccaneer managing to take Wrath's sword away. Now, Wrath has other blades on him, so it's not like he's unarmed now. But can you imagine the genius of, like, I'm going to shove my enemy's sword into my own guts and then run so that he doesn't have it? I mean, that is... I don't know that that was entirely intentional from the beginning on Buccaneer's part, but truly impressive, I can't lie. So this is when he pulls 2 knives and is just like, well, I'm going to make do with what I've got, so let's go again. And greed begins to come at him. Meanwhile, we have all of the people out on the street discovering these soldiers that have been taken down and coming into the front of the palace. And there's this new dude whose name I don't get, but he is like apparently the one that's sort of in command now. He's got a real square face, like a long rectangle. And he is bringing in as many other forces as he can. And he says, we're going to wipe out these Briggs traitors and then we'll rescue the Fuhrer. And they just start coming straight in through the front doors. And we go up to the roof again. And I'm so sorry, guys. I cannot remember this guy's name. I just said it. It's Fullmetal, right? I don't know why it's just completely not making any impression on me. But Buccaneer is yelling to Fullmetal, like, you've got to do something. And Greed, he like yells to Greed that he needs help. And Greed is like, I don't know if you noticed, but I'm fighting Wrath over here and I cannot. So get it figured out. And he finally turns around and is like, all right, I guess it really is up to me. So he starts yelling out commands and telling them to get Buccaneer out of here. I was genuinely surprised that Buccaneer agreed to go. I thought he was going to argue and try and stay, but he just lets them sort of shuttle him out of there. The soldiers that are trying to come in through the front are being mown down by the Briggs soldiers with their assault rifles, their machine guns at the top of the stairs. And just like, I don't know if the plan was from the beginning that we're going to have the Briggs soldiers kill and we're going to have the Roy faction not kill so that the Briggs soldiers look like the bad guys. But if that wasn't the intent from the start, it's certainly working out well for them at this point. And so, yeah, they can't come up the stairs because they've just got this entire area covered. And the commander tells them to call Central Command and have them open the gate from the inside. And they're saying, don't enter the base. And the commander takes the phone and says, we're at the main gate. You need to open the gate. And the soldier says, no, there are monsters in here. It's been overrun. We are not opening up. And as he says that, all of these clouds of smoke suddenly appear, like a bunch of smoke bombs went off in the room, got tossed in while they were on the phone. And one of the guys goes down. And the commander backs away from the phone going, what's happening? And he gets clunked on the back of the head. And it's Fu up in this bitch, ruining lives like a boss. Absolutely speed of light type shit. And literally almost flying through the air. And he just comes at the Fuhrer with this speed and energy that even Greed was not mustering up. It's quite something. I was delighted to see him. He's prancing around, this dude. It's amazing. And Greed had that long jacket on, and it looks like it just goes floating away into the air. It's a real weird moment, and I'm not sure if that's supposed to be like particularly significant or what. But maybe it's not his. Maybe it's Fullman's jacket. Because it goes floating away, and it feels like it's supposed to be a real moment. But Bradley wasn't wearing one, and I'm not sure whose that's supposed to be. Anyway, Greed thanks him for jumping in and helping, and Fu is just like, I'm not doing this for you. You're inhabiting Ling's body. I'm clearly doing this for him. And says something about how Greed's chi is sickening, but then he has to admit it did actually help me locate you, though. So I will say that. And he says, why don't you tell me who this is we're fighting, since neither of us could leave a scratch on him? And that startled me. I did not think that he still didn't know what the Fuhrer looked like, who he was. I don't know. I guess there's not really like, are there photos in this universe? I feel like there are photos. Are there newspapers in that sense? Or is it all... I guess I don't really have any memory of like the kind of technology that we've got. But apparently he's just like never seen the guy before. So Greed has to tell him like, that's Fuhrer King Bradley. And Fu just has a moment of, oh shit. Like, he came at him so hard. And I don't know that he would have if he was aware of who this was. And he straightens up and says, this is the first time I have actually laid eyes on him. And his hand starts to shake. And he says, now I know what the bastard who took my granddaughter's arm looks like. And he gets this expression on his face. And the Fuhrer just looks back at him with no change in expression. There's no disdain. There's no anger even, really, despite him being wrath. There's nothing to indicate that he gives any shits about this guy. It's like he's looking at a locked door and he's just trying to think about how to unlock it. How do I get past this? Like the guy's just an object of some kind. And it's cold-blooded in a way that I don't think we have seen yet in the show. Genuinely unnerving. And yeah, I just felt a bit of a way about Bradley this episode. He's just very scary. He's just very scary in this one. I'm just saying. So Zajiegi says, I think it's Fu's jacket that goes flying away. Okay. Bean Moore says, there are photos. Madame Mustang showed Roy some photos of Salim. Oh, right. Right. Thank you, Bean Moore. I forgot about all that. Also, all the family photos at Ed and Al's house and the Rockpal's house. Right, thank you. There just aren't any of Bradley plastered everywhere, which is kind of surprising because they're sort of in a dictatorship. And usually having an image of the ruler all over is part of like establishing power, that they are immediately recognizable, that they are sort of considered omnipresent, you know, and it is surprising that his image isn't more places, but that might just be part of trying to not let people know how he doesn't age. Keep that under wraps. Like either way, it makes sense. Just not giving them as much information as they can is the probably smart way to go on this. So that's the end of the episode, and there's no post-credit scene on this one either. So I was really devastated when this ended here. I wanted it to. This fight has been super fun to watch. And Bradley he has not felt like that much of a threat to me. And then here he comes and I was just like, okay, I take it back. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap. Thank you again very much to Max for commissioning this. Thank you guys, all of you, for coming into the chat and hanging out with me. Appreciate you all. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
Unspoiled Network podcast.